I want to start here. I want to play you guys a little sound clip from my adolescent years. Austin, go ahead and hit that real quick. Does anybody under the age of 25 know what that is? A few of you, yeah. They must have lived in the country, yes. That was the sound of a computer getting connected to the internet via a telephone line. I know Garrett was struggling there. He was concerned. Yeah. No seance or anything. That was a real sound. When I was a kid, dial-up was the only option. You didn't have DSL or anything like that, especially like some of them said. I lived way out in the country, and so that was it. And when HughesNet came around with their satellite internet, the download speeds were like 4 megabytes per second. We just thought this was it. This is the fastest internet that ever will exist. Because dial-up was so bad. If you wanted to play a game with somebody that lived in another house, that wasn't going to happen. You didn't have the speed. If you wanted to watch a video on YouTube to learn how to do something, which YouTube didn't even exist back then, but also that you weren't going to be able to do that. If you wanted to email a picture to a friend, it would have been faster for you to print it out at Walmart, go stick it in an envelope, and drop it off at the post office. They would have gotten it faster than with dial-up internet. It was terrible. If you wanted to download music off of iTunes, you couldn't do that, but you could get it illegally from a website called LimeWire or Napster before that, which is why so many computers from that era have viruses. Dial-up connection was poor connection. But it was a connection nonetheless. And that word connection it's pretty versatile if you think about it. We use it in a lot of different ways. I have spent hours up in this ceiling or on a ladder with my head stuck up in the ceiling running different audio cables and video cables and networking cables to make sure that we can do all the things we do. There's a connection being made there. If I am trying to catch up with a friend, I might send them a text message and say, hey, let's connect this week. When I began to get more interested in Bree, I told my parents, I think there's a real connection there. Each week in our gathering, and I've already done it today, but I'll hold up a Connect card. And what I'm hoping is to get information from our guests. If you are flying almost anywhere in the world, you're going to have a connecting flight to get there. The word connection or connect can be used in a lot of different contexts, but it's almost always similar, at least, in what's being said. The idea is that multiple different things are with one another. They're closely related to one another. The dictionary definition, in fact, is bringing together or into contact so that a real or notional link is made. Like we're wanting things to be linked together. Well, Jesus used this idea of a connection in John 15, and that's where we're going to be spending most of our time today. In John 15:1, Jesus said, I am the true vine. This is the seventh and final I am statement that Jesus made. We've been studying these things for several weeks, and I think he does a really nice job of bringing them all up to this point where he tells us what to do with the reality that he's been feeding to us through these I am sayings. Remember that with each of these sayings, Jesus is pointing back to that moment in the desert when he told Moses, as he's speaking through a bush, he told him, this is my name. This is, if anybody tries to come at you and say that you can't do this on your own power, well, they're right, but you can drop my name, I am, and they're going to understand. So Jesus was making the claim that he is I am. He's making the claim that he was present in the desert with Moses. He was present in the miraculous exodus of the Israelites as they crossed the Red Sea and escaped Pharaoh and their enemies. He has been present at all times. With this seventh I am statement, Jesus demands that we make a decision about this truth, about this reality. John chapter 15, verse 1 through 8, and we're gonna read all the verses together right now. It says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. The big idea that Jesus is presenting and the action that he's calling his disciples to is to abide in him or to remain connected to him. But remaining connected to Jesus only bears weight if we understand and accept the truth of verse 1 in which Jesus said that he is the true vine. Throughout the Old Testament, the people of Israel are referred to in this vine or vineyard metaphor. And historically, they would say that by being connected to Israel, you are connected to the life-giving vine. The Pharisees believed and taught that if a person wanted favor with the Lord, they needed to be Jewish in heritage and in practice. And even when Jesus showed them all throughout their sacred text that the reason that he was here so that everyone could be in right standing and right favor with the Lord, they still acted dogmatically about their exclusivity of their heritage as that was the only means to them that you could be saved. And what Jesus was saying here was that it wasn't by being Jewish that a person could be saved. It wasn't by keeping the law that a person could be saved. It was through him that a person could be saved. He was the true vine. In my garage, there's this stack of extension cords. They're all the same color. They're all the same size. They all look the exact same. And I know that there's a way to store extension cords so they don't get tangled, but I was never taught that trick, so I do the whole wrap it around the elbow thing and throw it into a stack or into a tub. And what happens is when I need an extension cord, I pull on one and they all come out. And so I've just accepted that this is the fate of my life. This is the fate of how it's going to go when I need an extension cord. So whenever I need to use one of my saws, my table saw, or really any kind of tool, I'll grab the whole stack and I'll find one end and plug it into the wall, and then I'll just start plugging in to the other ends. It's faster than untangling all the cords, but not all of them work. It's kind of a process of trial and error. It's a process of elimination to see which one is truly going to give the power. They all look the same. They can all be plugged into any one of them, but they don't all offer the actual results of power, of electricity. Only one of them is going to do that for me. Well, the followers of Jesus had to rightly discern where the true life-giving power was. They had to rightly discern that the law could not provide what Jesus could provide. They had to discern that the Pharisees could not provide what Jesus could provide. They had to discern that their heritage, who many of them, they were Jews, it could not provide what Jesus could provide. And our context may be a little bit different, but the fact remains that we have to rightly discern where true life comes from. We have to rightly discern that there are other things that are trying to promise life and fulfillment. We have to discern that it is only Jesus, the I am, who is the true vine. He's the only one that offers true fulfillment. So if Jesus is the vine and we're the branches, then Jesus paints this word picture of two types of branches: abiding branches, non-abiding branches, connected branches, disconnected branches. And there is value to being connected to the vine, while there is tragedy for those who are disconnected. Connected branches, Jesus says, bear much fruit, while disconnected branches bear no fruit. About 25 years ago, my uncle decided that he wanted to plant some grapes. And I don't know South Central Oklahoma is prime grape growing territory, but he tried it anyways. And so I got together with him. He lived right down the road, so I was always going over and helping him build stuff and do stuff. And we built this trellis out of a cattle panel and some lumber we had laying around. And I wasn't there for the planting process, so I don't really know if it's a seed thing or if it's like you plant a little plant and it eventually turns. I don't know. But eventually, this whole trellis that we built out of a cattle panel started forming these vines. They started crawling up it, and then you could start seeing these little teeny tiny grapes start to form. It was working. What we were doing was working. And one day, I was weed eating for him, and I accidentally clipped one of those grapes with the weed eater. One of those vines. Well, the vine that I clipped with the weed eater, it eventually just withered and died out, while the other one, it started growing great. Like it just kept flourishing. It kept growing more. The leaves kept overtaking things. The grapes eventually grew into a full cluster of grapes that you could eat. It doesn't take much imagination to understand the point that Jesus was trying to make in this moment where he has left the upper room with his disciples and now he's standing out over the Kidron Valley. Nobody has asked a question. He's just giving them this information that he thinks that they need to have. And he's standing here at the Kidron Valley, which was a place that was known for having a lot of vineyards. And so as he's staring at these grapes, possibly even staring at people, a vine dresser who is working the grapes, and he gives them this information that as people, if we are connected to him, the source of life and vitality, then we're going to bear fruit. However, if we are not connected to him, we're not going to bear fruit. Oh, what kind of fruit does the connected follower of Christ produce? Well, in the verses that follow this, Jesus mentions two types, love and joy. When we are connected to Jesus and when we're connected to his love for us, out of that love flows love for others. And maybe it's a tough pill to swallow, but if you don't love others, if that fruit is not being produced from your life, if you have more hate and anger than you do love, then you're not connected to the Father. You might think I'm being a little harsh, but Jesus actually said right there in verse 8 that we prove to be his disciples by the fruit that we bear. We're not saved because we love the unlovable, but we are proved by it. We're not saved by the fruit that we produce, but we are proved by it. We're not saved by our works, but we are proved by them. And if Jesus' joy is in us because we're connected to him, we'll just put off our own joy. Listen, I know that some days are rough. Some days are just gloomy days. But so often we just walk around with this, woe is me. I have it the worst. We walk around with this attitude. We walk around like we don't have the joy of the Lord within us. And this needs to be a reality check. We need to remember that joy is not dictated by circumstances, because for those who are truly connected to Christ, even in terrible circumstances, they're full of joy because they have the joy of the Lord. The joy of the Lord has entered into their lives. But it isn't just love and joy that are produced. It's all the fruits of the Spirit that are produced by those connected to Christ. And one of the most significant fruits that is produced by those who are connected to Christ is other followers of Christ. Jesus said that we need to be his witness. Jesus said that we need to make disciples. He said that we need to reproduce ourselves. About 3 years ago, I don't remember what the occasion was. I think it was a New Year's party. But we were at Devin and Kayla's house. And I don't even think Horizon Church had started yet. But some kids decided, and it might have been my kids, I don't know. Some children decided, let's throw a pumpkin against the wall as hard as we can and bust it into a billion pieces. And so they did that, and it spilled its guts all over the yard back there. Well, a few months later, lo and behold, pumpkin vines started to grow. That pumpkin, in the right circumstance, fruit reproduces itself. Well, as Christ followers, in the right and proper circumstance, we will produce the fruit in the form of other followers. We'll reproduce of ourselves. Jesus also goes on and he shows this contrast between connected and disconnected branches. He's shown it by the fruit they produce or the fruit that they don't produce. But then he goes on and he shows the contrast by the care that is received from the vine dressers. Those connected to Christ will experience eternal providence, while those disconnected will experience eternal punishment. Jesus said that the branches that weren't connected, that weren't bearing fruit, would be thrown into the fire. When Bree and I were dating, and even when we were first married, her dad had a small peach orchard. And every year he would examine the trees, these trees that they looked good, they looked full, but he would see, are there any limbs that are damaged? Are there any limbs that are no longer producing fruit? And he would take those branches, he'd throw them in a burn pile. He'd walk through the orchard and see, okay, it's Oklahoma, there's these storms. Have any branches been blown down onto the ground that we need to just pick up and throw them into the fire? In this metaphor that Jesus was using about the vineyard, throwing non-fruit-bearing limbs into the fire was a common practice to get rid of what they viewed as space-wasting branches. These were not branches they wanted to keep around. They weren't doing anything. They were just wasting space. They're just taking up valuable space that could be used for other things. Well, this is a harsh teaching from Jesus, and I know that we don't like harsh teachings, but the truth is this. As God's creation, we have been given chance after chance to connect ourselves to Him, to abide in Him. We have been given chance after chance to produce fruit, God-honoring fruit, the fruit that He wants us to produce. We have been given chance after chance to do what God has created us to do. And at the end of our lives, if we are not connected, if we are not abiding in Him, if we are not producing fruit, we have wasted our lives and we will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was most certainly talking about hell, a place we don't like talking about. And what a tragic ending to an already tragic life. As we're going to discover in a minute, those who are connected to Christ, they have providential care. They have joy, they have love. Those who are not connected, those who are disconnected, they don't have those things. Those connected to Christ have God's protection and joy, while those who are not connected don't have those things. Those connected to the true vine have life, vitality, and sustainment. And those who are disconnected from Christ, they don't have any of those things. They're just in their life, just left to wither and suffer, and then at the end of that withering suffering, thrown into the fire. What a tragic end to an already tragic life. But that's not the only option that we have, is it? Instead of eternal punishment, we can have eternal providence. Jesus said that every branch that bears fruit gets pruned so that it will be more fruitful. Another yearly process for Bree's dad on the peach orchard was pruning. He had these trees that they looked full and they looked like, man, these are great trees, but maybe it would be a little bit better if I cut this branch off. Maybe it'd be a little bit better if I clear some things out of this area right here. And he did that in order for those trees to be the most fruitful, in order for him to have the best outcome possible. We, on the other hand, at my house growing up, we had a few apple trees that my grandmother had planted just for the purpose of making her world-famous apple pies. And when my grandpa got to the point where he couldn't physically prune them anymore, they just went several years without being pruned, not being cared for, and then eventually they just died. They just withered up and died. These trees that had been fruit producing for decades were dead within just a few growing seasons because they weren't cared for. We like to think, and when we read this and we're going to talk about this, we like to think of this pruning process as just this painful thing. But the truth is that that's not the point Jesus was making. That's there. That exists. Pruning is difficult. Pruning stinks sometimes. But the point that Jesus was making was that the vine dresser prunes so that this can have the best outcome possible. Well, Jesus' providence for us, He cares for us. He prunes us so that we can have the best outcome possible. When the Lord prunes us, He's caring for us. But just as I said a moment ago, sometimes pruning is painful. Sometimes pruning hurts. If I'm honest, there have been pruning seasons in my life that I would not have chosen on my own. But I've seen the Lord's hand at work in those seasons, and I just trust that He knew what was best for me. And I trust that He knew what I needed in that moment. And I think that we know that we need pruning, but don't we try to stop it from happening? We'll try to hold on to something that God is trying to free us from. We'll try to keep something going that God is clearly telling us it needs to stop. I know it's painful to be pruned, but it's one of the benefits of being connected to the true vine. It's one of the benefits of bearing fruit, and that's that we have someone caring for us. We have someone orchestrating our lives in a way that gives us the best possible outcome. It is part of His providential care if we will let Him. I really love listening to the testimonies of people who have just been through like a really difficult season, and they've come out on the other side. They have this strength that is unparalleled that they wouldn't have had otherwise. They have this passion that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Some of the greatest moves of God have come on the other side of some of the hardest pruning of God. But that's how the Lord works sometimes. And I can guarantee that when a Christ follower sees that I went through this difficult season and I didn't like it and I wouldn't have chosen it, but what God has done through that, I would do it over and over and over again. You know, in week 1 of this series, I challenged you with the same question that Jesus challenged His disciples with. In the book of Matthew, Jesus is talking to the disciples, and He says, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answer, and then He says, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You're the Christ. You're the living Son of God." And so I challenged you the first week of this series as we're stepping in to this I am series, these I am statements. Who do you say that Jesus is? And then over the past 8 weeks, we've looked at what Jesus said about Himself, and I think the case has been made very clear who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. He's part of the triune Godhead who spoke creation into existence, who created man in His own image. He is the Word incarnate who came to dwell among His people. He's the sacrificial lamb who was slain for our benefit. He's the life who defeated death and sin and brings the fullness of life to all those who follow Him. He is I am. But each of us has to answer the question, who do I say that God is? Who do I say that Jesus is? And we have a decision to make. If Jesus is the bread of life, He's inviting us to eat. But only we can make that decision. If Jesus is the light of the world, He's inviting us to step out of the darkness and into the light. But only we can choose to do so. If Jesus is the door, He is open for us to walk through, but only we can choose to do so. If Jesus is the good shepherd, He's inviting us to a life in which He cares for us and lays down His life for us. He's inviting us to be led by Him, but only we can choose to do that. If Jesus is the resurrection and the life, then He is inviting us to trade in our death clothes and be clothed with His righteousness and receive life for death. But only we can choose to do so. If Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, He's inviting us to follow His direction, to believe in His truth, and to walk in His truth, and to be granted a life that never ends with the Father. But only we can choose to do so. And if Jesus is the true vine, He's inviting us to abide in Him, to be connected to Him, to bear fruit for Him, and to be providentially cared for by Him. So I'm going to ask you today, are you abiding in Him? Does your life bear fruit that says you are abiding in Him? Because make no mistake, you are abiding in something and you are producing some kind of fruit. What does the fruit of your life say about you? Are you producing the fruit of the Spirit? Is your life defined by your love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? Are you producing fruit in the form of other disciples? Are you multiplying yourself? Are you producing another kind of fruit? Are you producing fruit that doesn't glorify Him? Are you producing fruit that grows your kingdom while neglecting His? I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself. It's not for my sake. It's not for anyone else's sake. It's for your sake to take inventory of your life, because the reality is that abiding branches and non-abiding branches look very similar to one another a lot of the time. Have you ever seen a tree that, like right after the wind came through, and it may have disconnected a branch, but that branch stayed up there? You can't hardly tell because the branch, it still has leaves. It might even still have some fruit. They look and they appear alive and well. Eventually, though, the leaves turn brown, the fruit withers up, the branch falls to the ground, and it's picked up and it's put into the fire. It's the same way with people, right? I mean, consider who Jesus was talking to in this passage. This is known as the farewell discourse. It's just him and the disciples, and he is issuing this warning. It's not like he was talking to the Pharisees who had constantly rejected him. It's not like he was talking to this large group of people that he didn't know. This was an intimate, small setting with the guys that had followed him day in and day out for 3 years, and he issued a grave warning that someone can look like an abiding follower of Christ while in reality they are a pretender. So, are you willing to be honest with yourself? Are you willing to look at what you are abiding in? Look and see if you're abiding in the true vine? Are you willing to look and see if you are authentic? Are you willing to look and see what your response to pruning is? Are you willing to look and see what kind of fruit you're producing? Because a clear and honest look at these things will give you either confidence that you are abiding in Christ, or it will give you a sense of urgency that you need to make some changes. But once again, in response to Jesus being the I am, only you can make the decision whether or not you will make those changes. Only you can make a decision whether or not you're going to abide in him or abide in something else. Let's pray.